do you think we could take things out of order and you want to just get started on the ethics stuff just to give a quick intro to what the timeline is right now? Is that too much of a curveball?
I can do that. Let me just get to the so um as some of you guys might know, one of the things that we're trying but not yet succeeding in getting through is getting the city council to address charter ethics reform. Um, this is something that the council hasn't addressed comprehensively since the 90s. And as a result, we're stuck with the rules that were made in the 90s. But just to give a little background, in December 2021, the Ethics Commission, they created an ad hoc committee to explore charter reform, specifically around charter ethics reform, which is Charter Section 700. And they approved recommendations in August of 2022. And a few days after the Fed tapes came out, that set of changes was introduced as a motion into council. But since its introduction, much like we've seen with some of these other report backs, nothing else has happened. 13 neighborhood councils have weighed in to support or to support if amended, including my own, Reseda. Um, then in November, because it had been over a year at this point, the Ethics Commission President Jeff Darr submitted a letter to the council file urging the council to agendize this item. But what's really important is that there's a time limit on this if we want to see it for the November 2024 ballot. So unless this is submitted by June 18th, it won't get heard on the November ballot. Um, and one of the reasons it's really important that we get the city council to do this is charter change is a lot harder than an ordinance change. So HLA that just seems to have passed, that doesn't require getting as many signatures as it does for a charter change. If you want to do a signature initiative for a charter change, it takes 15% of all registered voters in the city to do that, which is a extremely expensive, high burden. So that's why we really need city council to act here.
Awesome. And thank you for being flexible, and apologies. I tried to share my screen and it told me I had to give permission, and I'm not a great computer person, but we're good now. Thank you all for joining. Really excited to be talking about some nerdy election stuff and some super nerdy ethics charter reform stuff. But we will be spending about 30 minutes talking about election results. Please, if there's anything that you'd like us to talk about or questions you have about any individual races, drop those in the chat. Ross and Jamie are going to be keeping an eye on that to flag if there are any questions there. And we'll be spending about 30 minutes on that and then go into a really quick mini teach-in just to give you an overview of why we really need to strengthen the independence and power of the City Ethics Commission. But first things first, the sexier things, and that is our election results. And just a few really quick notes for you to just understand what you're looking at. The city of Los Angeles and LA County are unique from almost everything else you're going to see on the ballot, in that if somebody wins more than 50%, that race is done. There is no race in November. Whereas if you're looking at pretty much everything other than president, um, things like the assembly, the state senate, Congress, all of those, the top two move on regardless. So that's a really important thing to keep in mind. When we get to November, you'll see some cities where they have at-large systems where people vote for multiple representatives, and the top ones are all, put on the council. That's a little bit different, but you really shouldn't be seeing anything like that right now. But the city or LA County is so huge, I really can't say that with absolute confidence. Really, really important thing to keep in mind. We know the universe of voters that are out there in LA County, but we don't know how many actually submitted a ballot. That is something we won't know until about next week, middle of next week. We'll maybe have an idea before that just to kind of project, but we're really not going to know because we give voters a lot of time to ensure that their ballots, so long as they're, sent in the mail before our by-election day, for those to actually trickle into the LA County Registrar. Um, Really important to remember that even if we're just looking at the city of LA, turnout can be wildly different. You're going to see turnout in some districts that's 10, 20 points higher than in some other districts in the city of LA. What's been counted so far is all of those votes that were mailed in before election day, all of the early vote center votes, and the in-person votes from election day. So there's a really big deviation in what has kind of come through the pipeline and what remains. It's really unique here in the city of LA. We've long had this kind of system where, um, sorry, we've had this kind of a trajectory where you see um, races where you have a much more conservative early vote, and then as you get to election day, it really does spike, and you get a huge Democratic turnout, and then it kind of evens out and continues to get a little bit more Democratic. That all changed with our um, election system when we started to mail a whole lot more people ballots. That really, really skyrocketed with COVID. And we've seen huge changes in who trusts vote by mail. Traditionally, it used to be older, whiter, wealthier, more conservative folks, whereas now it's a whole lot of Democrats. So we have a really weird setup where the first votes you saw on election night were kind of the best it got for the more leftward candidates, and then the returns got more conservative as we got through those initial votes. Now it's going to shift back upward in a more dramatic way. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's not necessarily always a steady trend. Some of these races might bounce around. These updates can be more concentrated in certain areas, but generally speaking, whatever you're looking at is probably going to get a more leftward shift. And the last thing, and this is something that I even posted something today and realized that the Senate district has areas outside of LA County. So if you're looking at Prop 1 or the Senate candidates, their performance, you can't just be looking at lavote.net. That's only going to show you what happened in LA County. Um, so with that, wanted to just give you a few resources. The LA County Registrar, that's obviously the best place to go for live results. There's a link where you can find the schedule of results that are coming out. We're going to see updates every single weekday for the first 2 weeks. So that's a big change. And it could be 2 weeks plus before we have real clarity on these races. The California Secretary of State's website is where you want to go for their live results. Political PDI, political data, they have a ballot tracker, which is really, really great for people trying to get an insight into what kind of demographics there are in turnout so far. And lastly, if you're looking at money in politics, the spending and fundraising by candidates or independent committees, that's on the LA City Ethics Commission website. And before we kind of just browse the lavote.net, wanted to show you PDI's ballot tracker, which I mentioned. And this is some cool stuff where you can actually see the demographics on turnout. If you look at LA County right now, the stuff that's already in there, 29% of Republicans have turned out, whereas only 20% of Democrats have turned out. So that gives you an idea of what things are looking like overall. You can also see the age for turnout, and you can see these plotted over time. And this is the really cool thing is being able to look at it by council district. So if we go over to District 2, this is one that's in the valley. And it's taking a minute to load, but you can see that they're at about 20% turnout right now. And you can see District 4, unlike some other races, they're actually sitting pretty decently with younger folks at 13% turnout, whereas other districts are in the single digits. District 10, this is one very fascinating to see. It's a very diverse district, so seeing the different kind of demographic turnouts can give you an indication of what's going on and what's to come. District 12, this is probably our most polarized district with a healthy Democratic base and a healthy conservative base. And as I said before, there's other things up on the ballot. Steve Garvey is running and he's driving a lot of Republicans out, and that might be a factor in why we're seeing 32% of Republicans in District 12 turning out. Way, way more than the Democratic turnout so far. But as I said before, this can all shift and change. And then in District 14, this is one that obviously there are a lot of eyes on. Only 16% of the vote in right now. And as I said before, this is a great resource just to look at those races that you're really honed in on and really interested in. And with that, I don't know if there are any questions that have popped up in the chat. I think we're good.
Mhm.
So I'm going to pull up the county registrar's website. And at the very top, you can see a little bit of information on like the actual turnout so far. As far as what's been counted, we've got just 18% of the vote or so in right now. And if you look at 2020, which is like a comparable election as far as the cycle, we had about 38% turnout. So this could potentially be, you know, half of the turnout that we see overall, or it could be a much, much smaller portion of it, closer to a third. So there are a lot of huge variables, and we'll have to see what the implications are. More than likely, it's going to be a more diverse electorate turning out in these ballots. But at the same time, as I mentioned before, there's some Republican enthusiasm, and that's something to just keep in mind. You can see the types of votes that have come in so far, those by VBM, vote by mail, and those that were cast in person. And you can also see the partisan makeup. And first up, wanted to hop to District 2. And in this one, we have not the incumbent. The incumbent is Paul Krikorian. But his former chief of staff, former Assembly member Adrien Nazarian, is sitting up at 38%, looking really solid over there. The really big thing to look at in this race is what's going to happen between the 2 and 3 spots. Nazarian's pretty safe where he is, but Jillian Burgos is just down, I believe, either 280 or 380 as far as votes. 380. That's a really, really doable gap for her to close. And the demographics that typically turn out earlier and vote at a higher rate include the Armenian community. So it's very possible that there's a leftward shift that goes in Jillian's favor, but also an uptick in Latino turnout, which could play in her favor as well. This overall is a race that could be pretty interesting as far as how it ends up shuffling. Um, I don't know if Jamie, if you or Ross have any comments on this one. I think the big kind of shocker here is to see Manny Gonez, this husband of Kelly Gonez, the LAUSD board member, really, really underperforming. And just remarkable to see what Jillian's done, considering, a grassroots candidate that was able to unlock matching funds, being outspent at 4 to 8 times the rate by some of her opponents, and could very well make this runoff. Um, District 4, that is one where the incumbent Councilmember Rahman is sitting at about close to 46%. Um, Ethan Weaver is coming at her from the right, and his game plan, I don't have any inside information, but it's probably heavily borrowed from the Rick Caruso playbook when he ran for mayor, where trying to get that knockout punch in the primary, avoid a runoff, is the real big game. This thing might go on to November. It may not. If it does go on in November, things that play into Councilmember Rahman's favor is it will be a more progressive, diverse electorate when this goes to the November ballot. At the same time, the last thing you want to do is offer the LAPPL, the Police Protective League, 8 more months to beat you up in the mail and attack you and drag you into the mud. So, I'm assuming that she would very much enjoy getting this thing over with. A bit of a climb for her to get up to 50%, but we saw in the latest update that she took a really solid move forward there. And yes, as it noted in the comments, Weaver endorsed by the Republican Party, supported by Rick Caruso, who hosted a fundraiser for him. And from our reform perspective, the most concerning thing was him dismissing the extent to which Councilmember Rahman was targeted in the last redistricting process. When that was clear at the time, it was made crystal clear by the Fed tapes. But nevertheless, that's Ethan. And I think the funny thing here is the number of Ethan Weaver supporters that were cursing Lev Baronian on election night. And now they are probably grateful for Lev Baronian as offering the best opportunity for them to keep Nithya under 50%. District 6 and 8 are a little bit boring, so we won't spend too much time here. You have Imelda Padilla running away, as expected, getting around 75% of the vote. Marquise near 80%. They're both going to probably gain some ground. Um, District 10, that is a really fascinating one. Councilmember Heather Hutt, of course, was appointed by Councilmember Nuri Martinez, the council president. The council confirmed that appointment. She was reappointed last year, and genuinely a solid, strong performance from her, even though you wouldn't normally look at an incumbent and say 38% is a great performance. She was facing a very, very deep field of candidates who all could have easily, made it up into that top two. The big thing here, I think, is Reggie Jones Sawyer just absolutely throwing up all over himself. Uh, we'll see how things pan out. The 2 and 3 spot, there's some significant space between Grace Yu and Eddie Anderson. As I mentioned earlier, there are certain communities and demographics that tend to vote earlier and at a higher rate. And District 10 has a large Korean population encompassing Koreatown. So Grace Yu is probably going to lose a bit of that share that she has. We could easily see those 2 and 3 or 3 and 4 candidates maybe threaten that. But if you had to put money on it, it'd probably be safer to say that it's going to be a Heather Yu race. Um, Real tragedy in District 12. I mean, who knows how this one's going to pan out? We have Councilmember John Lee, who's facing 10 ethics violations. and he is sitting at just under 30% right now. And we've seen some of these races, especially in these kind of like polarized districts, where there is a huge bounce back and the later votes. I wouldn't be surprised if this gets down to the lower single digits, but there is a huge full hole for Serena Oberstein to dig herself out of. As mentioned in the chat, definitely got in the race a little bit too late. Also just an enormous amount of money that was spent on Councilmember Lee's behalf. He got nearly $700,000 dropped from the Police Protective League on just propping up his field campaign, which is a figure that's twice the amount your average city council campaign wields. So just a really astounding amount of money thrown into that race. District 14, this is one that there are obviously a lot of eyes on. Kevin De Leon is sitting at 26.8% right now. And that's something that is alarming to look at, but you should keep in mind that that is an abysmal performance by an incumbent city council member. One of the worst performances we've seen in 20 plus years. Um, it's not looking good for him. Um, the moving forward, he's probably gonna be hindered by the fact that there's a leftward shift in the electorate. At the same time, there are a lot of voters in areas that make up his base of, Boyle Heights, El Sereno, who are going to be turning out later. And there are, there's a enormous, this is a heavily Latino district. So we could easily see a significant chunk of his base still kind of lingering out there. I think we'll see all three of them meet up in the mid 20s, and we could easily see Kevin and Santiago move on, Kevin and Isabel, or Santiago and Isabel. Any three of those combinations. There was a question in the chat. Is there any city council incumbent that has ever done this bad? I don't know. And that's actually something that I've been asking some people today. It's I would assume you'd have to go back to the 90s and 80s and maybe even earlier to find somebody that's performed this bad as an incumbent. So just something that I think needs a closer look once we have an idea of how far he is falling down there. But I can't think of anything off the top of my head as far as something comparable. Um, we do of course have Wendy Carrillo in this race, who going into the thing was a favorite candidate. She has her district has the largest overlap with District 14. So she had some inherent advantages with name recognition, and I just don't think that there's a way forward for her in this race, but we shall see. Um, anything, Ross, Jamie, before we move on to LAUSD?
Nothing for me.
And if anybody has any questions on the council races, we can hop to that or stay on that before we move along. Moving along to LAUSD, you probably saw in the last few weeks Mike Trujillo taking out his frustration on Wendy Carrillo's campaign demise by taking an axe to Khalid in District 1. And he ended up losing the endorsement of UTLA. That wasn't announced until, just before Election Day as far as officially rescinding their endorsement. So he's dropped from first to second in the last 24 hours. Remains to be seen if either of these other two candidates, Dwayne Davis or Dee Dee Watts, can hop in there. This is an open seat that's being vacated by the incumbent, George McKenna, who's not running again. The incumbent in District 3, Scott Schmerlson, is below 50% right now. He might be able to climb himself out of that, but this could be headed towards a runoff. District 5 is a very interesting one of the most heavily gerrymandered LAUSD districts out there. It encompasses areas from the northeast area of Los Angeles, wider and wealthier communities that are far less reliant on LAUSD, while it also dips all the way down. It's like this weird horseshoe shape, and it encompasses communities in Southeast LA that often get neglected in LAUSD and don't get the representation they deserve because they don't have the power base as far as voter turnout or donations. That's in part why Council or LAUSD board member Jackie Goldberg gave her endorsement to Gallardo, who's from Southeast LA. He is sitting in third place right now. So it remains to be seen if he can pull himself into that top two. Um, and yeah, this is definitely probably one of the more interesting LUSD races to watch. District 7, Tanya Ortiz Franklin is facing a kind of super conservative candidate in Gutierrez, and I think this one is safely over. Really big ballot measure in the city of LA was HLA. That's sitting at 63% right now. Just want to take a moment and give props to Streets for All for an amazing campaign to get that on the ballot, and getting it across the finish line. There's a lot of inaction that we've seen in City Hall from the ethics side, something that they faced, and them being able to kick city council's ass is quite a sight to behold. Um, for district attorney, we have George Gascon sitting at 22%. That is not good. That is really bad. Um, and the only kind of silver lining that George Gascon can find out of this is that the number 2 candidate right now is Nathan Hochman, who I believe ran for California Attorney General as a Republican most recently. So it would be really, really easy for Gascon to turn it into a more partisan race with him. I believe Hochman is a nonpartisan now, but there's just that a heavy recency there that's kind of hard to shake. John Hatami is a district attorney. He has kind of made a name of himself by uh, you might have seen him in the there's like a Netflix docuseries on some child abuse cases in LA County and neglect in the system. So he is somebody that just off of some name appeal, like there people like the guy. He's bounced around from being a Democrat to a Republican to a Democrat. So like Hochman, there's a he's a bit more on the conservative end of things. If you're looking for Gascon to face a tougher opponent, then you'd probably want to see Hatami hop through. Um, but if you're looking for George Gascon to have a chance, Hochman is the one that you would want to see him go against. The absolute worst person that Gascon could have faced is Jeff Chemerinsky, the son of Erwin Chemerinsky, a scholar, legal scholar, somebody who was involved in our charter reform process 20 years ago. He is, only kind of marginally to the right of Gascon and would have just been an absolute layup for them to run against Gascon. And instead, he was not able to kind of rally the support he needed. Um, There was a question in the chat on what do you think of the effect of HLA in terms of pressuring the status quo? I mean, I think they did more than pressure the status quo in that like they forced their hand. And there's been some talk recently and thought as to whether or not it's gonna lead to some pushback, whether there's gonna be some litigation. How will it transcend to other topics? I think that remains to be seen. Um, I it I don't know how much they will necessarily view other issue advocates with the same kind of respect and credibility as they would a campaign that was able to raise millions of dollars and get something on the ballot. We see all too often in City Hall that like money talks, and being able to bankroll a big thing, being able to bankroll independent expenditures or fund a lawsuit against the city can very much change how they approach you when it comes to Public Records Act requests or policy outcomes that people would like to see. So I think it is a bit of a wake-up call, just because we've seen this strategy before. When Streets for All, they were trying to get this thing passed through the council on their own. Council didn't want to touch that, and ultimately kind of propped up their own alternative measure and were able to divert a lot of attention towards that. Um, but we shall see. For the Board of Supervisors, we've got Janice Hahn sitting very comfortably over the former sheriff, Alex Villanueva. She's just over 50%, but I think she can feel pretty comfortable given that the remaining votes are probably going to trend towards her direction. That's what's been shown so far. Catherine Barger has a much larger lead as far as being above that 50% threshold. But there are a number of Democrats running against her, Holden, Anthony, and there's still some things to be seen in this race to see whether or not Catherine Barger gets held below 50%, but she's sitting in a decent place right now. And I don't know how quickly we'll be able to go through everything. I know we want to make sure we have time for the ethics charter reform stuff, but I did want to flag some of the major races. For Congress, we have Laura Friedman up at top in District 30. This is Adam Schiff, the congressman's seat right now. Portantino is kind of far away from that second spot. It remains to be seen if he can rally to make this an interesting Dem on Dem runoff. Otherwise, if it is Friedman and Balakian, Friedman is going to 99% sure cross that guy. District 34 is an interesting one from a progressive perspective. This is literally the most progressive district in the state of California. Bernie Sanders' single strongest district in 2020. And that is why you have seen David Kim come very, very close to beating Jimmy Gomez twice, increasingly close. At the same time, over the last few cycles, Jimmy Gomez has increasingly run into the arms of the squad to bring up those progressive creds. And we will see this one unfold. It should be an interesting race to come. And one thing I want to just shout out, forgot to mention, you might have seen Ben Savage, Boy Meets World in there, sitting above Nick Melvoin. And that's just kind of a lesson. LAUSD board member Nick Melvoin looked at this race and said, I got a free pass at this thing. I'm his term does not directly overlap with the congressional cycle. So his seat on the board was safe. So he had a free run, and ultimately finishing where he did probably leaves his brand sitting much more poorly than it was going in. So just some lessons to be learned. On the state Senate side, Anthony Portantino is one of those congressional candidates in District 30. And the race to replace him, we have a great Democrat here in Sasha Renee Perez. Um, from the Alhambra City Council. She was originally up. We saw the Republicans swing towards the end of last night. It'll probably swing the other way. Who knows where the top two finish? The big one to keep an eye on is Yvonne Yu. She is a self-funded, very wealthy candidate that was able to drop a lot of money into this race and you know, get where she is. The other races on the assembly to note, we have a lot of people leaving the assembly or termed out. Um, this district here, District 52, is Wendy Carrillo's district. Jessica Colosa, who is close and works for Rob Bonta, the Attorney General, is at the top. A lot of money spent on our behalf. Frankie Carrillo is a formerly wrongfully convicted man who spent a lot of time in jail for something he didn't do, and has spent a lot of time fighting for criminal justice reform. He looks slotted to make that runoff with her. Um, District 54, this is Miguel Santiago's district. His district director, Mark Gonzalez, is running there, and he's facing a progressive challenger. This one should be interesting as it unfolds. And then District 57, this is Reggie Jones Sawyer district. It looks like we're pretty locked up for these top two. So with that, wanted to just pause before we go to ethics charter reform and see if anybody has any questions on the races we've gone over. Thoughts on AD 40? Oh, this is one that I have not paid a lot of attention to this cycle. We have Pilar Chavo, who came into office in 2022, made a huge rally against Suzette Vallardes to win that seat. And she's facing a, kind of MAGA conservative challenger. He is up right now. I would almost guarantee you that this outcome is going to be reversed 2 weeks from now. I don't know when it's going to flip, but I would be pretty certain that Pilar should edge him out. If not, we'll see this thing in November, and much more favorable electorate for her in that one. Any other races people would like to hop over to, or questions on anything we've gone over? With that, I think we're ready to turn back to ethics charter reform and judges. Whew. I do not have my full list of, actually I do. There are a number of progressive judges that are running, some of them public defenders. So just really quickly, Rhonda Heyman is one of those progressive challengers, a public defender down right now. George Turner is another one, very slightly down, should probably overtake there. Erica Wiley is another one, very close. That one, we will see what happens. There was a write-in candidate for number 93, so we really won't know for sure where that is, but obviously tough to mount a write-in candidacy as a judge in an area the size of LA County. Lachey Henderson was another one of those public defenders in third right now, but not too far from, that top two. We've got Christmas, another one, a district attorney, but a lot of more progressive folks voted for them, as you can see in the chat as well. Kimberly was one of those public defenders. These are all very closable. And something to keep in mind is when we're talking about a city council race, we're talking about 100 to 180,000 voters. When we're talking about LA County, we're talking about a much larger universe of voters. So there's a whole lot more to be seen and potentially some bigger shifts that you could see in the net results. Leslie Gutierrez was district attorney, but a lot of progressive folks leaned towards that choice. Same with Georgia Huerta and Luz Herrera was another one. That was people really didn't have a great feel for anybody being better in that race, but threw it at the dartboard towards him. So with that, Jamie, if you're ready to go. Give me just a second. I'm lost. There we go.
There we go. You go to the next slide. Sorry, I just switched to my phone because my network's unstable. So we talked about charter reform and sort of where we're at right now. But I wanted to talk a little bit about a very recent case on the consequences of the failure on ethics charter reform that I think sort of crystallizes why this is important and gives it a real world example. So some of you may have recently read in the news about the Les Moonves case that was before the ethics commission. It's also the Ian Metrose case, but it was largely reported on as the Les Moonves case. And for a little bit of background, a few years ago, a woman by the name of Phyllis Gottlieb, sort of during the peak Me Too era, went to an LAPD station to report a sexual assault allegedly by Les Moonves. And when she did that, the Hollywood station captain, Corey Polka, at the time, had a relationship with Les Moonves. And he immediately flagged to Les Moonves' team that this woman had come in, reported the sexual assault. And the result was that Corey Polka gave a copy of a non-redacted, like the full copy of the report on her sexual assault to the person she was accusing of sexually assaulting her, which, as I think we can all agree, is a horrific and egregious breach of trust, and something that needs to be dealt with seriously. This came to light during the New York AG's case against Les Moonves. It also looked at a lot of insider trading, but for our part, we care about the ethical breach of trust here. So there were two stipulation agreements. One was for 3 counts for Les Moonves, and one was for 1 count for Ian Metrose. But because we are tied to the fines that we have had since the 1990s that are definitively made in our charter, the maximum fine is $5,000. And because the Ethics Commission lacks the tools to be able to sort of fight the big guys, they automatically, in these kinds of cases, tend to offer an incentive to settle the case. So in Les Moonves' case, they offered a 25% discount, and in Ian Metrose's case, they offered a 50% discount. So for Les, it was around 11,000 out of the 15,000, and for Ian Metrose, it was about 2,500 out of the 5,000. In a surprising move, but I am happy that they did it. The Ethics Commission rejected both stipulation agreements to say we want them to go after the full amount. Miss Gottlieb, the one who had went to the LAPD station to report, she's since passed away since this all has occurred. But the real issue is that these are pitifully small fines that really, in many ways, could be looked at as a cost of doing business for many, and that's not something that we want. But on top of it, we can't do things like going after them for the cost of prosecuting these cases. I guarantee you that the work that's been done by ethics investigators on these cases amounts to so many man hours, and that the actual cost to the city to go after these cases costs far more than the $15,000 and $5,000 fine, respectively, especially when
that's probably what it cost Les Moonves's attorney team in 20 minutes of work. So because we don't have charter reform, the Ethics Commission essentially has its hands tied and can only go after these tiny amounts. It's incentivized to settle these kinds of cases, and it doesn't really have the tools at its disposal to sort of whack these egregious cases on the hands and make it hurt. And so I was really pleased at how many people called in and expressed, and I was even more pleasantly pleased that the Ethics Commission rejected the stipulation agreement. That's not something that they've done in quite some time. But it really highlights our need for better tools, and also the real failure of our government to anticipate these results. And I just think it's really shameful that we're turning, to the family of the sexual assault survivor and being like, this is the best we can do because our city government won't move forward on reform. So thanks.
Thank you, Jamie, and thank you for leading the pushback on that. There are times where you can give some of our commissioners some pause, but I really haven't seen anything like that where all of them unanimously end up saying, no, this isn't right. So not something that would have happened without you. And with that, just want to, take a step back and make sure everybody has an idea of what we mean by charter reform. The charter is the city's version of the Constitution. Any change that we make to that thing requires a majority of voters to support it. There are three ways that it could make its way onto the ballot, either by gathering signatures of 15% of registered voters, that's around 380,000 voters, plus a bit of a cushion that you need for ones that get knocked out. You could create an elected charter commission. That's a whole mess of a process, but that is one way you can get things on the ballot otherwise. The other is just 8 votes. It really is that simple. 8 council votes. It's a lot tougher than it than it sounds, but important to remember that really is what it comes down to, is just 8 city council votes. Our city ethics commission was created 30 years ago when Mayor Tom Bradley faced a big scandal where we found out that he was serving on a board for a bank that the city was doing business with. And what we found out was the city attorney got back and said, that's actually not illegal. And it made us all realize we got to do something about that and change the law. So they created a comprehensive, set of reforms that included lobbying reform, ethics reform, campaign finance reform, creation of the Ethics Commission, and the creation of our public matching fund system, where candidates can get public money to help run for office so they're not reliant on big donors to the same extent. So the Ethics Commission, when it was created 30 years ago, it was the model for the nation, for the world. There were a lot of eyes on it. And we've kind of failed to keep pace with a lot of the ethics commissions and agencies that have been created since then. The Ethics Commission has some strengths. They are able to handle a really big, wide mandate. And they do a whole lot, even though they are under-resourced. If you go over to the state website or the county website and try to find campaign finance data, you'll want to jab your eyes out with a pen. But if you look at our website, it is so much better. And there are even some ways that you can aggregate data, visualize, look at, donations based on zip code, things like that. The Ethics Commission, we have some of the strictest late laws in the nation, so it is extremely helpful to have them there for candidates, the public officials to turn to so they can get advice and they don't need to hire big fancy lawyers that charge them way too much money for the most basic advice. The weaknesses of the Ethics Commission, they are underfunded and they are at the whim of city council. And we saw a story in 2018, it wasn't revealed who, but there was allegedly a budget committee member on our council that threatened the Ethics Commission and said, if you don't change your advice on gift reporting, then we're going to cut your budget. The other weakness is they're just advisory and their kind of lawmaking power. And LA City Council has a bad habit of ignoring the things that they recommend. They are not truly independent. They are directly appointed by elected officials. It can take way, way, way too long for them to take any sort of action, and fines can be viewed as a slap on the wrist. Um, I mean, just look at John Lee. There's conduct that happened apparently 7 years prior, conduct that we heard about 4 years prior, and we're just now getting around to them. Um, and I just want to backtrack. Somebody asked in the chat about Palka, and the Ethics Commission does not inject itself in kind of ongoing controversies. They don't weigh in on a potential ethics violation in the middle of a campaign, and they don't comment on what's happening with certain investigations. But you can safely presume that we'll probably see Palka in front of there at some point. It's possible that he's trying to negotiate something or he's trying to contest something. So we shall see what happens there. It's also really important to like level your expectations. We have in some instances really blatant quid pro quo bribery, but you could really only know that if you were bugging council members' bathrooms like the feds were. You could really only know that if you had a massive team carrying out these investigations. The Ethics Commission is simply not suited to deal with some of the corruption cases that we see in the news. And it's also really important to remember that just because you don't see them doing anything doesn't mean that's their own choice. They fall down in the pecking order. So the feds, the district attorney, they all get first bite at the apple before the Ethics Commission has a chance to really weigh in and take action against somebody. So that's a part of why it takes a bit of time for them to come around in cases like John Lee's. I'm just trying to catch up in the chat. I saw a question, cost per signature. Yes, if you were trying to do a charter amendment, it would definitely be in the range of 1.5 to 3 million, exactly as you said. And what is handled by ethics versus department discipline? There are some internal disciplinary processes. I think it would really depend on the department to really parse out that question. Some departments have internal policies that the ethics does not have jurisdiction over. So it would be a real case by case basis thing. Moving along to the Ethics Commission recommendations. There's a proposal that Jamie mentioned earlier to increase the power and independence of the Ethics Commission, increase their ability to dole out fines, giving them an independent lawyer. Right now, they have to turn to the city attorney for legal advice, who is looking out for the elected officials and not the Ethics Commission. So they need to have independent legal advice. Um, there's a proposal that council would be required to act on Ethics Commission recommendations within a certain period of time. They could vote it up or down, but they would be forced to take some sort of action. The city of San Francisco, they've had just as many corruption scandals as we have, but they actually do something about it because their ethics commission has the power to put things on the ballot. And that offers them a route to ensure reform moves forward. And it also offers them leverage with the board of supervisors in San Francisco because they know if we don't cooperate with them or we don't take their recommendations seriously, they can go around us. There's some restrictions that are added there. They make it easier to prosecute cases and find probable cause. But there's some bad things in this proposal. Like it doesn't give them an adequate protected budget. Right now, the Ethics Commission's budget is $6 million. It would really need to be, in the range of 8 million or so for them to have an adequate budget. As I said before, they're still appointed directly by elected officials. If you look at some places like Long Beach and Oakland, their ethics commissions are in some cases larger than ours, which is just 5 right now. and they are a number of them are chosen through open application. So anybody could apply for the position and not directly appointed by elected officials. The other thing that's really important to recognize is we've had some people serve on the Ethics Commission that ran for office in the city of LA 2 years prior. We've had instances where the spouse of a developer who was fined by the Ethics Commission got appointed to the Ethics Commission. And sure enough, her husband ended up getting fined again for excess contributions. We had a period in the early 2000s where Eric Garcetti's dad, the former district attorney, was on the Ethics Commission while his son was a council member. So just goes to highlight that we do need to do a better job of insulating the Ethics Commission to ensure it's a bit more independent and who can actually serve on the thing. There would be some really big impacts by changing this. It would one, there's a independent redistricting measure on the ballot this fall. It's not official yet, but it's headed there. And the Ethics Commission plays a really important role in helping the commission get off the ground. So it's really important that the Ethics Commission is adequately resourced and more independent if it's going to have that kind of power. Because if you don't do that, we could end up seeing elected officials try to influence the ethics commissioners so that they get certain people past the screening process for the redistricting commission. An empowered ethics commission would change the dynamics in City Hall. We probably would not have gone since 2019 without any anti-corruption laws being passed in our city as we have. The biggest thing is they would be able to more vigilantly carry out cases, and this is just something that we've seen over time where there used to be an executive director of the ethics commission that really went after elected officials for gift violations, excess contributions, all kinds of things. And after we went through the 08 recession and the years following that, they ended up getting their budget cut in half. So I think just for there to be a different world out there where people running for office take the ethics commission more seriously, they need a bit more freedom to actually do that. Otherwise, they're just going to find themselves getting their budget cut in half again. And I want to just pause there and make sure Jamie didn't have anything she wanted to add to that. And if there are questions in the chat, please throw them out there.
One of the things that really became clear to me when I thought I was going to be on the ethics commission, and in a lot of the conversations that I had prior to all that, is that it became really clear that the politics at play with the ethics commission are something that can't be ignored. And it really drove home why so much of this reform is necessary. We can't have good governance if we have to have a body that can at times be scared a little bit to fulfill its objective. And I hate to be that blunt about it, but that is the reality. And that's another part of why we need these changes. And it's not something the city council particularly wants to hear or accept, but it is reality.
Yeah, and I think there's a climate where they're beginning to take the ethics commission appointments a whole lot more seriously because these commissioners are gonna have that role I mentioned in the redistricting process. And because there is the potential that we'll be giving them more power. So I think there's just a whole lot more incentive for them to try to control ethics commissioners. And the best way to control them is control who even gets on the board. So a really big issue to keep an eye on. And want to just stop there and see if there's any questions in the chat. And if you want to pose them yourself, you can feel free to raise your hand as well. I see a question in the chat about the signature requirements for the city of LA. And yes, we have an absurdly uh lofty signature requirement that has been on the books for over like about 100 years, at least 100 years. It's way fewer signatures for somebody to get on the ballot running for a higher office in the state of California. So this is something a lot of us want to see changed so that we can see more competitive elections and see more of these races end up being decided in November with high turnout electorates than being decided this early on in the process. And a good example of that would be the race that we see in District 12. If there were more people running there, that thing would be getting settled in November. Um, are ethics votes public? Should they be? The votes of the ethics commissioners, yes, those are public. And where is the ethics's role in the redistricting documented? They currently have zero role whatsoever in the redistricting process beyond ethics compliance. There is a proposal. I know Jamie will have the council file on hand off of memory, but I do not. So if you don't mind dropping that in the chat, there is a council file moving through right now on redistricting, and the Ethics Commission has a role in uh, administering the process, or they have a role in overseeing the process. So the city clerk has some responsibilities in putting together the applications, what the questions are, kind of schedules, timelines, things like that. Those sort of things would have to be approved by the Ethics Commission. So there is some sort of check and balance there. The other big role that the Ethics Commission would have is the city clerk would be screening candidates to see if they meet the basic requirements. Do they live in the city of LA? How long have they lived in the city of LA? Are they a lobbyist? Things like that. And get together a big pool of applicants. That pool would be handed over to the Ethics Commission, and they would screen those candidates to make sure they have a minimum level of community involvement to be able to serve on a important position like the redistricting commission, because there was very much a desire to ensure that we have a diverse representative group, but we also wanted to make sure that there was some sort of check and balance, because we've seen instances where a pedophile was serving on a neighborhood council and people didn't realize it until they got onto the neighborhood council. So there might be instances where somebody has just engaged in some really horrific stuff where they would not be suited to serve on the commission. So there's some sort of last line to make sure that people get screened out. Um, any other questions? And please feel free to raise your hand. I think I saw one go up earlier, but I might have missed it. Really important things to keep in mind on this. We put together some survey questions for city council candidates. Those are on the website. And one of the questions that's on there is, do you believe ethics charter reform should be on the ballot this November? If it's not, that's something that would not be on the ballot until maybe 2026. So that's a really big issue. Another one is, should we have remote public comment for city council committee meetings? One of the questions posed in the chat was, should we lower the signature requirement? We included a question on that. So that's a good resource to turn to just to learn a little bit more about some of the folks that are running. And please keep an eye out, because we don't know exactly when this thing will be coming up, but there's a pretty good feeling that we will see the ethics charter reform item at the city council committee meeting sometime this month. So if there are any other questions, feel free to raise your hand or throw them in the chat. And Jamie, I don't know if you wanted to add anything. With that, we are 10 minutes past our end time. So just wanted to thank everybody for joining. And if you have any kind of lingering questions, please hang around. I'll hang on here for at least a few more minutes. And if it's something related to these issues, great. If it's not, and it's just some sort of city council thing, please throw it out there as well. Happy to take any kind of questions you got.
Just wanted to say, given our meeting, the Times just broke a story that Council President Krikorian possibly violated an ethics rule by sending out an email on his official email in support of a dream.
Sorry, I was looking at the chat. Could you repeat that again? What?
The Times just broke a story that Council President Krikorian possibly just violated ethics rules by sending out an email on his official side email, congratulating Adrien.
Oh.
Yeah. Speaking of why, oh my God.
Yeah, and we've
Yeah,
seen
that
just really wild stuff this cycle. Like Councilmember John Lee is using the domain name for his campaign that is titled Councilmember John Lee. And that's just something that's not allowed by ethics laws. You're not supposed to misuse your city position or title for electoral purposes. There are a lot of times where candidates get really cute with that, but this is not like cute. It's pretty blatant. But there's just sort of the belief that, hey, I can break the rules right now, and the worst thing that'll happen to me is 2 years later, the Ethics Commission's going to fine me a little bit. There was a question in the chat about why the Ethics Commission allows candidates to get big donations from organizations offering them tens of thousands of dollars. That is a little complicated. In the city of LA, you can only give $900 directly to a candidate, but there is no limit on what you can spend to support them independently so long as you're not coordinating. So that is where you see, folks like Imelda getting tens of thousands of dollars being spent on our behalf, or folks like John Lee or Ethan Weaver getting nearly like over $1 million being spent on their behalf. So that is not an issue with the Ethics Commission. The Ethics Commission would probably love to do things differently. That is an issue with our Supreme Court. So unfortunately, for quite some time, that has been the law of the land. I see Jamie dropped the LA Times story in the chat on Krikorian and Nazarian, so please feel free to check that out. IECs, Independent Expenditure Committees. A lot of times people refer to them as super PACs or IEs. Independent expenditure is the root of that. The other thing, there was a question in there on the role of corruption via behested payments and office holder discretionary funds. Behested payments, it's kind of a wonky concept, but it's basically an elected official. A good example would be John Lee. He does a lot to raise money for the YMCA out there. So he asks Amazon, hey, can you donate $20,000 to this nonprofit? That makes John Lee look good. So that is a kind of a benefit that he's getting. And if it's over $5,000 in value in a year, that has to be publicly reported. There's a lot that happens below 5,000, and even the stuff above 5,000, they really do a bad job of reporting those behested payments. So it definitely has a role in corruption, but there's really not any real limits to it. Cities like West Hollywood and San Francisco require disclosure for anything over 1,000. We pushed to do that in 2019, and even though there was an motion from Councilmember Bonin and Krikorian on that, that never got a hearing. There were also some efforts to provide some ethics protections on and whether or not you can solicit behested payments from lobbyists or developers or contractors. City Council refused to touch that. They really just did not want to touch that gravy train. Other questions? Going once, going twice. Hearing none, please feel free to reach out if you ever need anything. Dropping email in the chat. And if you're interested in getting more involved, we've tried to really step up what we're doing as far as civic education and making some of this data easily available on small dollar donors, things like that. So if you have kind of any sort of random interest in campaign finance, civic education, things like that, happy to try to find a way to get you more involved and plugged in. And with that, I think we're good unless there are any last burning questions in the chat or from the audience. All right. Well, thank you all for carving out some time to geek out over money and politics. And we will circle up a month from now and try to find a topic folks want to talk about, whether that be something moving through council or just some teaching on skills as far as navigating City Hall. So thank you all, and please enjoy your night, and may the odds be in our favor with the remaining election results.